Hi, thank you for the very warm introduction. My name is Yvette, and today I'll be talking about content moderation based on some of the work that I've been doing with my students the past few years. And it was funded by a huge National Science Foundation grant, which is ending soon, which so I've kind of embarked on this journey to try to disseminate as much of the results as possible. Um, Coming here to College Park, it felt a little bit like coming home because my father actually got his PhD in computer science here back in the 80s. So it kind of felt like coming to grandpa's house. And I saw walking over here that there's so much construction going on. And I was like, oh my God, grandpa, you're getting a facelift. Go, grandpa. And so it's like really nice coming back here, kind of now as an adult, and very happy to share my research with you. So my research is human computer interaction. And as you know, it's a very interdisciplinary field. And when it comes to human computer interaction, I'm a little bit more on the social side of things rather than the technical side of things. And so I like to describe my research as a combination of communication and psychology in the context of computing. And throughout my career, I've looked at a lot of different kinds of social platforms because for me, like one person interacting with a computer is interesting, but when you look at a network of people interacting with each other, it's so complex and so difficult to understand how things are going on. And that poses a very interesting intellectual challenge for me. And so I haven't really been married to any particular platform, just, as platforms come and go. I started off on Second Life and most recently have looked at Patreon and OnlyFans and how content creators, interact with their audiences. And as you well know, we have lots of problems with the internet and social media. And most of these issues we know are still unsolved, right? We have fake news, misinformation, online harassment. I know a lot of really great research going on at UMD on these issues as well, harmful content, illegal content. And I think it's uh like nowadays there's more public awareness about the concept of content moderation, but when I started off it was still a very much new concept where a lot of people in the tech industry knew that there were actual human beings, behind the scenes, like deleting things and kind of cleaning up bad stuff online, but the public had very little awareness of this. And so a lot of the early research was focused on commercial content moderators who are workers employed by companies such as like Facebook or YouTube, and kind of focusing on their labor practices. But when you think about it, moderation is not necessarily just carried out by people who are hired by companies. And if you look at any kind of social media, there's always some kind of moderation taking place. So who is it that handles this kind of undesirable or bad content? And then, of course, we have AI, but then there are things that humans can do that AI cannot do because AI is not as sophisticated. And humans are also very creative. So once you find an AI solution to one thing, like they come up with some other new thing. And so we do have a considerable amount of people who are reviewing content online. And then as we move from archival data, such as text or audio, to real time data and more richer forms of media, these become more hard to moderate. And so when we look at moderation of humans, they usually come between two different categories. The first is commercial content moderators, and these are people who are hired by companies. And then we have volunteer moderators, and sometimes this is also called community moderation, where members of that particular social media or online group or online forum will get together to self moderate their community. And so platforms that support this kind of structure are Reddit, Twitch, Wikipedia, among others. And so we have this kind of unknown number of people working out there because we have a general idea of how many commercial content moderators there are, but in terms of volunteers, like, who knows? Um, However, there's still, of course, challenges. And of course, there's always going to be this scalability issue where there's always going to be more content than there are moderators. And so when it comes to deciding which content needs to be moderated, there are a lot of unclear standards and a lot of disagreements among people. So just as an example here, I have in the yellow box a list of things that are currently banned on Facebook. Which includes child pornography, human trafficking, nudity, animal abuse, etc. But even when experts are asked, oh, which of these items require priority, it's very hard to reach an agreement because people's values are subjective. And then when it comes to very gray areas, such as this historical photograph taken during World War II, during the Vietnam War, or this nude painting by Goya in the 1700s, technically this is nudity and would not be allowed on Facebook, but this created some controversy because people were like, well, this is, a historical photograph that was featured on the front page of the New York Times. Like, shouldn't this be an exception? But then once you start making exceptions, where does it end? And I also come across this myself because, in my copious spare time, I am an artist and I paint a lot of nude paintings, and sometimes they get censored on X or Instagram. So these are kind of a lot of gray area challenges that we face. But at least when there's text or photos, there's some kind of archival data that people can review and deliberate over. The challenges when it comes to live streaming, which is the context I'm going to be talking about today, is that it happens in real time, and a lot of times this data is ephemeral. And so if it only happens in the moment, and of course there's an option to be recorded, but if there's no recording, then what happens? And how do you deal with situations that happen in the moment? And so I'll be talking a little bit about my research on the platform Twitch and how we kind of started to understand and navigate these problems. In addition to text, voice, audio is another huge area that potentially requires a lot of moderation that currently the industry has not been able to solve yet. So I don't know, maybe someone in this room will be able to solve it someday. But voice is also a very vulnerable type of medium because it reveals a lot about your age, your potential location, your gender identity. And so there have been already a lot of media reports talking about like how, for example, female gamers use like voice modulators to hide their gender identity. And so with every new medium, with every new kind of format of media that we're allowing users to produce generated content with comes additional moderation challenges. So the main research context that I've been looking at in the past few years started off on Twitch. And Twitch is, if for those of you who are not familiar, it's a live streaming platform that originally started off as only allowing gaming streams. And so funny story was that when I initially created my Twitch account, of course, for research purposes, and I streamed videos of my dog just to see like what it was like to be a streamer. And I was immediately banned by Twitch for violating the terms of service by not streaming video game content. That said, now Twitch has really grown and they allow lots of different kinds of content, including dog streaming. So I guess I was really ahead of the curve. But this is a very interesting platform. And we started off with like a lot of, especially when you're trying to understand a new context in which there's not a lot of research, started off with a lot of qualitative research, including lots of hours of observations, like structured observations, interviews, online, talking to people online and in person. These are just some of my students. We attended 3 TwitchCons, which are huge conventions for Twitch streamers. And so we've gone through, started off with a lot of qualitative work and moved on to do more kind of statistical work with surveys later on, and then experiments. So Twitch is a very interesting platform in terms of the governance. And this kind of is a very good example of kind of the governance that you see a lot of self-moderating platforms, the way that governance on self-moderating platforms happen. And instead of a company being in charge of all the content, they're consisted of what I call micro communities. And so you have these like little pockets of like broadcasts within Twitch, and each community creates its own rules. So of course there are some very broad overarching rules that Twitch sets, but for the most part, like the nitty gritty rules are done by each community. So some communities might be like, we're okay with swearing, we are okay with adult content, and some other, communities might be like, this is not allowed, etc. And it really differs community by community, and who gets to understand, who gets to come up with those rules. It's mostly the streamer who is broadcasting. And so in some ways it's a little bit of a feudal structure. Like, I'm a little hesitant to use that word, but we also see a similar thing, not within the Facebook main newsfeed feature, but within Facebook groups, for example. A lot of Facebook groups have self-moderation within their groups, and Reddit also has a similar structure where subreddits kind of have their own rules and how they decide to govern it. And so we have this kind of pyramid structure where the streamer is on top, and then there are moderators who have certain executive privileges to delete content or ban other players, and then you have the viewers. And the real-time moderation is really interesting on Twitch. As you see in the green box that I've highlighted on the right side, this chat is kind of like moving very, very quickly or slowly, depending on how many viewers you have who are active in the chat. And if you'll notice, some of the users have a green sword next to their username. And these are, this is like a visual component to indicate who the moderators are. And so the thing about like this live chat that is very concerning to streamers is that they are usually showing their face on camera and reading these comments in real time. And so, it's one thing to kind of look at like a post on social media and like, decide and be upset about it and kind of ruminate about it. But this is like, it's happening in real time. So it's like really hard for them to mask their feelings. And so it puts them in a very vulnerable position, which makes them a very ripe target for a lot of people who want to attack them and say rude things. And so it is kind of a lot of the burden of making sure like rude things or inappropriate things are like deleted or taken care of immediately is up to the moderators. But then who are these moderators? And this is not just an issue with Twitch, but with most volunteer moderation platforms in general, is that there's no clear process of how to become a moderator. It's not like there's a job posted on LinkedIn. It's not like there's like a formal recruitment ad. And so what happens is that there's like some kind of ad hoc process in which broad moderators somehow are promoted from viewer to moderator status. And in that process, what happens is that, they don't receive any training. They don't even know what the expectations are. So they're kind of learning as they go. And a lot of times the streamers are also learning as they go as well, because if you're streaming to 10 people, you can manage the comments. But sometimes a streamer's growth is usually like happens suddenly at one time. And so, a lot of streamers have told us about like how they suddenly found themselves with like 100 viewers and suddenly they need a moderator. They choose like, their favorite viewer at the time who happens to be there, who they can trust. Or it's, not a very formal process of how these moderators are appointed. And so we see a lot of different types of moderators as well. So some people are really, they just want to be helpful to the community or to the streamer. But then there are people who really like enforcing justice. So they kind of they describe themselves as like wanting to be in control. There are some people who don't really like dealing with all the banning and stuff, but they really like chatting up people and like trying to make the community like a positive space, etc. So there's like a lot of different types of moderators. And when these moderators are recruited, the streamer has no idea what the preferences or, practices of this moderator is going to be. So it's very ad hoc. And in this process, of course, there's a lot of emotional tolls on the moderator, which include like underappreciation. I mean, they're not paid for their work, but they're expected to be there at a certain time. Misaligned relationship expectations. Like a lot of them do it because they really love the streamer, but like, that feeling isn't quite as intense on the other end. Um, Mental health, like dealing with negativity, and then like threats from viewers who have been banned or thought they were unjustly dealt with. So a lot of our early work kind of focused on like what are the hardships of these moderators, and then we started to look at what are the actual technical tools that they're using in this process, and um, it was even with like very rudimentary AI. I wouldn't even say it's AI. In the early days of Twitch, what they had was like a list of banned words, which I don't know. Should we call that AI? Anyway, the way that it worked was if you tried to type in a banned word, it wouldn't let you type it in to begin with. So there were some kind of things, and then there were bots. And so what happened was that these human moderators would also be working with these bots in terms of jointly moderating the channel. So if you look here, there's like two moderators here in the chat. One is a human, the other one is Nightbot, which is like a very popular bot at that time. And this bot is basically just like repeating commands like every X number of minutes. And it was mainly dealing with kind of like the mundane, repetitive things that need to be said in the chat. We found that moderation is more than just dealing with bad content after it happens, and there's a surprising amount of work that is done to prevent this violation from even happening to begin with. And so what we found out here is that like in order to really truly address moderation at its core, there needs to be a combination of like, yes, we need to detect things, and yes, we need to have ways to get rid of bad things, but there's also a lot of value in trying to find ways to deal with people, which seems like a very old problem for a new context, right? And the fact of the matter is that I mentioned this before, but like AI has limitations, and currently these kind of like lists of like bad words is really not enough. As you can see here, people even use emojis to replace letters because that bypasses the kind of natural language processing systems, or they use alternative spellings and other forms of creative means to get around whatever detection system is in place. And so we've done some work. This was done with Dr. Myung Cha at KAIST, in which we also, now that we know that people are using emojis to replace letters, well, we kind of built models to reverse engineer those those kind of words, and we found that this increased hate speech detection by 5%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're dealing with like billions of instances, it is quite significant. And then we've also been building some analytical tools for moderators that allow them to take a more high level view of what's going on rather than just looking at the chat as it passes. Surprisingly, a lot of moderators moderate for more than one channel and sometimes at the same time. And so when they're doing that, it's often really hard to, pay attention to read every single thing. And so this allows them to see certain patterns and also create dashboards that have information compiled about previous offenders. And so that's like another thing that we found is that a lot of times decisions aren't just made on that one case. A lot of times they take previous cases into consideration as well. And so kind of one of the biggest takeaways, and which I don't know if it's intuitive or ironic. As a computing person, I thought like, how could I understand moderation better so we can build better tools? And like, that's kind of how I wrote the grant proposal. Um, and my realization after several years of this research was it's really not about the content. Like we need better ways to deal with these kind of people situations, which includes anything from like tensions between streamers and moderators, how moderators coordinate and collaborate with each other. How do they deal with conflict? Like these are remote workers who are untrained, who have never seen each other, who have no guidelines or rule book about what they should do. And so it's like a very interesting situation. Um, a lot of our research, surprisingly, has focused more on like the social side of things and how people are navigating this space. Um, Another thing that we were really interested in was trying to reduce moderator stress. So imagine if you're like looking at nasty comments or nasty pictures all day, it could be a significant toll on your mental health. And so we ran a series of experiments. This one in particular was kind of inspired by research on cute puppies. Uh, so there's like a lot of research on cute puppies in psychology that indicate that seeing those like makes you feel better. There's like a lot of work in that area. And so we ran a series of experiments where like after like an X number of like nasty, racist, sexist tweets, you would see a very cute picture of a puppy. And we wanted to see if that would actually help with people's fatigue, emotional distress, or stress. And what we found was that for moderators who are relatively new to that work, it was actually quite effective. But for moderators who had been around for a long time, been there, seen that, like it didn't really have much of an effect. So that was really interesting, and I think that that there's definitely more work that needs to be done in this area. But now I want to think about like where we're going to go from here. And I've been thinking more about this because like in my other line of research, I've done a lot of work on online gaming and um and in a space that I guess now we're calling it the metaverse. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. Um, but when we get into three-dimensional virtual worlds, like I only see the problem of moderation like escalating because we're moving from text or images or like archival videos to ephemeral interactions. And and then context understanding is really key. So for example, I don't know how many of you have played online shooting games, but there's this term called spawn camping. And what it is like if you die, your body regenerates and you get to come back into the battleground, right? But the areas in which it previous used to be that, you spawn, your character regenerates in a specific area and your enemies are just like waiting there and they kill you as soon as you get out, and so you die and you go back again, and it was just like a really negative experience for everybody, except for like the people who were like camped outside the right. And so this was kind of like a meme. It's like either really frustrating or really fun. And this is one example of like the game designer saw this was going on, and so then they kind of modified the game so that like people are spawning at like random places to prevent this kind of thing. But what this means is that in a virtual world, there are going to be specific cases that perhaps we may not be able to think of in the physical world because it doesn't quite apply. And so uh, going back to, I told you that I started off my social media research on Second Life, and it was really it was really my gateway back into academia because I actually used to be a journalist for several years before I decided to go back to grad school. And the reason I went back to grad school was because while I was covering tech issues, like I was writing articles on Second Life, there was this online course being offered in Second Life at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. And I took that course, and my avatar is the one on the left side with the short skirt. And it was such a fun course that I thought, wow, if this is what academia is like, then I would like to go back to it. And of course, I later found out that not all academia is like, being an avatar in this space. But um I spent a considerable amount of time in Second Life at the time. And being Korean, I noticed that there were not any clothing for Korean avatars. And so I started designing hanbok, which is like the traditional Korean costume, and selling hanbok. And I actually, my shop is still in Second Life somewhere, and it generates like a few cents every month. I don't know, somebody's still buying it. Um, but uh, I also created a Korean style house, which is on the left side, and that's my avatar there. And one day I was like sitting in my virtual house, and what do I see in front of me? This huge ad tower of escort services. And it was just like right there in my face, and there was nothing I could do about it. And so what I did was I ended up changing my house to this brick box so that when I'm sitting inside, I don't see my neighbors' really rude signs, right? Um, and so this is what I think, like there's like a lot of like optimism about the metaverse, like, oh, you can build whatever you want. But it's like when there's no law, like something like this happens, right? And so at the time, this was not just an issue for me personally, but it was becoming an issue. So the company released this policy on what they call ad farms. Um, but ironically, in a place where you can build whatever you want and be whoever you could be, people started to seek regulation. And so this is an article that was run in Business Week, of a Chinese real estate developer who basically bought huge plots of land and developed very nice, luxurious neighborhoods with beautiful houses. And people would come and rent the houses in Second Life. And why would they do that? Because there was, there was more control over the neighborhood, and you wouldn't get like rude neighbors like I did, because then they would be kicked out of the neighborhood. And so I think it's very interesting that like we and you know it's kind of like the questions that we're facing now with the virtual worlds are very similar to the questions at the very beginning of the internet, where people thought, oh, like internet, we can do everything, and you quickly find out, that's not how things work, right? So we have kind of like new challenges to old problems. Um, this is an example of like an executive who was working at a tech company, and she described her experience as like a virtual rape, because she went into Meta's Horizon interface, and her avatar was surrounded by male avatars who were saying derogatory things and not allowing her avatar to move. And so, because this person was quite profile, like this story went viral. And so, what Meta did was they decided to create a 4-foot safety bubble so your avatar could not touch another avatar, which I guess in a lot of context like that would be okay. But also being intimate with another avatar could be something that somebody actually wants. And so this is kind of like, I think, like a poor short-term solution to that doesn't address a fundamental problem, right? And then we have specific problems specific to the metaverse. And again, going kind of back to video games, there's this derogatory practice called teabagging, where once you kill someone, like you crouch on their face, and this is very disrespectful to. I shouldn't be laughing. Very disrespectful. Um, and it's something that you wouldn't see in any context, or hopefully wouldn't see in any context like outside of video games. And so we have like a combination of like old problems that are just going to surface because people are people, and then there are going to be new problems that are specific to this new technology. Another problem here is, so this is another screenshot from the course that I took online at Harvard. Um, and as you can see, like they're like people are dressed weirdly, and that was the fun part of it. But the not fun part of it was Second Life allows you to fly. And so people were like flying around while the instructor was instructing, and it was like very, very distracting. And so at some point the instructor had to change the island settings so that so to not allow flying within the lecture area. So I mean, this is like a funny example, but it is an example of a very platform specific problem. And so when I hear people talking about the virtual world as if it's not a real world, it really irks me. I think that's one of my pet peeves, because I think that the problems that we see online are mirror the problems that we see offline. And just because it's virtual doesn't mean those problems are going to go away. And so the populations that we really need to be concerned about are people who are already vulnerable in the physical world, which includes minors, minorities, underrepresented groups, women, LGBTQ, etc. And how are we going to solve these problems? Like, we already know that moderation is not scalable with humans. There's always going to be more content that is produced than the number of people who can oversee it, right? So in some sense, community moderation is an ideal solution because, rather than companies trying to hire more people, like us protecting ourselves is ideal. But then who will volunteer? And what's going to happen for certain spaces for people who are very vulnerable, for example, like children. And so this was an interview, like a virtual interview that I did with this group of parents who voluntarily engaged in moderation in like children's virtual worlds. And so they were kind of there like lurking around and making sure nothing bad was happening. But I don't know if like embedded anonymous like people surveilling. I don't know if that's the best way to go about moderation. So how much freedom will we allow, especially in the context of children? I think this is like very important. This was a virtual world called Club Penguin that no longer runs, but it was like very popular back in the day, where you could create a penguin avatar, have like a little penguin house, and like visit other penguin friends. And the way that they got around harassment was that you could only say a fixed there was like a script that you had to follow, so there was like a drop down menu, so you couldn't say anything outside of that. And this, I guess this kind of worked like 10 years ago, but if you look at the platforms that children are using now, like they need to be given freedom of speech. So they're basically like, if you look at Roblox or other platforms that younger people are using now, there's they do have a lot of freedom. And of course, that also means that we need to be prepared for what that freedom exposes them to. So in terms of the future of moderation, I think um, I've been very reflective these days about like, what is my role in academia, and like, is writing another paper really meaningful? So apologies if it comes across as like being very philosophical, but especially after doing all this research, I feel like if we're going to be developing technologies, like we need to take a more proactive stance and address the fundamental problems, which is not about like, oh, how do we detect it? And oh, how do we get rid of this bad stuff? But like, how do we prevent people from doing that to begin with? And I think that goes a lot back to education, but also like thinking of technologies that are being more proactive rather than reactive, and building tools to support this kind of self moderation in communities. And as I told you, there's like a lot of technical but also social problems that arise within volunteer moderation, and I think building tools to help with that could be the next step. So how do we get people involved? Like, this is a question that I don't know. I think maybe I have to work more with psychologists or people in education, or to really get at the heart of this problem. But aside from Twitch, like towards the like more recently, we've been doing more general like cross-platform research. And when we ask people, I was very surprised. Like, we did a very large scale survey of like US residents, like asking them about their opinions on the role of the platform and moderation and so forth. And people overwhelmingly thought that companies should have more of a moral responsibility, even if they don't have a legal responsibility, which, okay, I can understand that. But when it came to community moderation, they wanted less responsibility on themselves. And so I think that, as long as there's that kind of mentality, who's going to want to volunteer and do all this hard work, right? So I think that, that is not like a sentiment that's going to go away very quickly, but maybe with the next generation of people, if they grow up thinking, oh, this is, something, in order to participate in the internet, I also have to do this. Like maybe that's something that could be possible for future generations. I don't know. Um, there's also, like I mentioned, a lot of ad hoc coordination going on. And, in the field of CSCW, we've done a lot of research on like remote work and ad hoc collaboration. And I'm hoping that a lot of those lessons that were in a more formal work context could be adapted and kind of revisited in these kind of more ad hoc contexts. Um, Also, there's like lack of institutional knowledge and training because of the ad hoc coordination. People come and go. The new person starts having no knowledge of what any of the expertise of the person that preceded them. So, like currently, we're building kind of um, like a website that will help build some of this institutional knowledge so that people can share their stories with each other. Um, so yeah, this is kind of like new directions that we're going in. I think as is with any research agenda, the more you look into it, the more problems you find and new directions, and that is depressing but also exciting. So yeah, I just wanted to share some of these insights with you of past few years on content moderation. Thank you.